They mocked him. They spat at him. In the vast city of Rome, where marble palaces towered over dirty back alleys, he was nothing more than a boy of no worth. A slave. A child whose future was decided not by his dreams, but by the will of his master. His name was Publius Helvius Pertinax. Few remembered it then. Fewer believed it would ever matter. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. For this boy, once chained, once forgotten, would one day sit on the very throne of the Caesars. But let us step back. Pertinax was born in 126 CE, far from the heart of Rome. His father was no senator, no noble. He was a freedman, a man who had once been a slave himself. In the rigid world of Rome, where bloodlines meant everything, Pertinax's birth was a curse. The Senate was full of patricians who traced their ancestry back to heroes of the Republic. Generals were born into families with estates, wealth, and influence. Pertinax had nothing. No one believed a boy like him could rise, not in a world where class was destiny. From the beginning, he was forced to endure humiliation. Those born of slaves were often treated as less than Roman, as if their blood carried shame. He might have followed the path of obscurity, living and dying as a schoolteacher or a minor clerk. Indeed, for a time, he tried exactly that. Pertinax began as a teacher of grammar, scratching out a poor living by teaching letters to children of families far above his station. But there was a fire inside him. He was not content to remain in the shadows. He was not content to bow. That fire caught its first spark in the army. Rome's legions were the great equalizer. Steel did not care if your father had been a slave. Courage did not care if your name was noble. In the field, among blood and mud, a man could prove himself by his sword. Pertinax seized that chance. His first campaigns were brutal. He fought in Syria against eastern tribes who defied Rome. He marched in the frozen lands of the Danube, where the empire faced endless waves of barbarians, Germans, Sarmatians, and countless others who tested the might of Rome. He was not gifted privilege, but he earned respect. He endured wounds, frost, and hunger. He rose rank by rank, not by wealth, but by skill. And soon, whispers spread among his men. This commander was different. He did not command from a cushioned tent. He fought beside them, in the mud, in the blood. He was hard, yes, but fair. For Rome's armies, this was rare. Many generals treated their soldiers as tools, to be broken and discarded. Pertinax was one of them. He shared their risks. And in time, he shared their victories. Yet his rise was not without enemies. In Rome, the Senate sneered at him. A man of slave blood? A man who had once taught grammar for coins? How dare he climb into the ranks of command? Aristocrats muttered behind closed doors, watching his career with suspicion. But emperors saw his worth. And in Rome, that mattered more than noble sneers. By the reign of Marcus Aurelius, Pertinax was trusted with critical campaigns. He fought during the long, grinding Marcomannic Wars, where Rome's northern borders burned. He helped push back invaders, securing victories where others had failed. And with each triumph, his reputation grew. But so too did the danger. For in Rome, success was never safe. Men who rose too high without noble blood often met the same fate, betrayal. For now, though Pertinax survived, his star rose. He became a senator, a governor, a general. The chains of slavery were behind him. Or so it seemed. But the empire itself was beginning to rot. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, died in 180 CE, leaving his son Commodus on the throne. Commodus was not his father. Where Marcus was wise, Commodus was cruel. Where Marcus sought philosophy, Commodus sought pleasure. He fancied himself a gladiator, fighting in the arena, while the empire grew weak around him. It was in this dangerous, unstable Rome that Pertinax climbed higher than anyone could have imagined. The boy once mocked for his birth, once trapped by the weight of his father's chains, was now a man standing among generals and senators. His enemies still whispered. His allies watched with caution. And yet, step by step, he was moving towards something unthinkable, the throne itself. But Rome never grants power without blood. And the path that had lifted Pertinax from slavery would soon place him in the most dangerous seat in the world, the throne of emperors who ruled but rarely lived long. The boy who was born a slave was about to become the master of Rome. But at what cost? The Rome of Commodus was a city in decline. Gold still glittered in the palaces. Gladiators still spilled blood for the roaring crowds. But beneath the surface, the empire was cracking. Corruption spread through the Senate. The Praetorian Guard, those sworn to protect the emperor, sold their loyalty to the highest bidder. And Commodus himself? He played at being a gladiator, swinging wooden swords in mock battles while the provinces starved. Into this chaos stepped Pertinax. By now, he had earned his place among Rome's senior commanders. He was no longer the poor schoolteacher, no longer the soldier clawing for recognition. He had fought in wars from Britain to Syria, and Rome had rewarded him with governorships, provinces where he ruled in the emperor's name. In Dacia, he kept the restless tribes at bay. In Britannia, he restored discipline to rebellious legions. Time and again, he was the man Rome sent to fix what others broke. But every rise in power drew more eyes. Envy sharpened like a knife. The Senate respected his skill, but never forgot his blood. Whispered insults followed him, the freedman's son, the schoolteacher, the slave who dare sit with us. Yet even they could not deny his results. Provinces stabilized under his hand. Soldiers remained loyal. He was effective, too effective, and effectiveness in Rome was dangerous. As Commodus sank deeper into madness, Rome became a game of survival. The emperor trusted few and executed many. Senators disappeared. Generals were poisoned. Friends became traitors overnight. It was an empire where a whisper in the wrong ear could mean death by morning. How did Pertinax survive? By balance. He was careful never to outshine the emperor in public. He kept his victories modest, his demeanor humble. He showed Commodus loyalty, even as the emperor descended into paranoia. But fate would not let him hide forever. In 192 CE, a conspiracy struck at the heart of power. Commodus was strangled in his own bath by men closest to him, including his mistress, his chamberlain, and a gladiator. For years, Rome had suffered under his madness. Now, suddenly, the throne was empty. And in the chaos that followed, all eyes turned to one man. The Senate, desperate for stability, declared Pertinax emperor. Think of that moment. A man whose father had been a freed slave, who himself had taught grammar to survive, was now placed upon the throne of Rome, master of the greatest empire on earth. It was unthinkable. It was unprecedented. And it was dangerous. Pertinax did not want the throne at first. He knew the risks. Rome's emperors often ruled for years, but they also died violently, betrayed by guards, senators, or rivals. But the Senate pressed him, and the Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite soldiers, at least pretended to support him. On January 1st, 193 CE, he was crowned emperor. The city roared with celebration, at least on the surface. But beneath the cheers was unease. The Senate had chosen him. The people respected him, but the Praetorian Guard? They expected payment. Rome's emperors were not made by law or noble birth. They were made by the Guard, the men who controlled the palace and the city. To secure their loyalty, each new emperor traditionally paid them a massive donative, a bribe, disguised as a... Pertinax knew this, but when the time came, he offered them far less than they demanded. This was his first mistake. He believed in restoring Rome, in cleaning its rot. He slashed extravagant spending, cut corruption, and tried to rebuild order. He reduced gladiatorial excess. He enforced discipline on soldiers who had grown fat and lazy. He sought to restore Rome to the ideals of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king. But ideals do not buy loyalty. Gold does. The Praetorians grumbled. They had expected a man on the throne to shower them with riches. Instead, they received less than promised, and were told to obey stricter rules. Pertinax's very honesty and discipline became his greatest threat. Yet for all his missteps, the people adored him. He walked among them. He listened to their grievances. He lowered taxes. He gave them hope after the madness of Commodus. Rome had not seen such a ruler in years, a man who ruled not for pleasure, not for blood, but for justice. But the shadows were already gathering. Whispers spread through the guard. They had killed emperors before. Why not this one? Senators who envied him encouraged the murmurs. Enemies he had made during his governorships fanned the flames. He tried to reason with them. He tried to hold Rome together with reforms, laws, and vision. But Rome was not built on vision alone. It was built on fear and greed and blood. The guard watched him carefully, waiting, counting the days. And one fateful March morning, only 3 months after his coronation, the guard would make their move. The slave who had become emperor was about to face his greatest trial. But this time, the sword would not be in his hand. It would be at his throat. It began on a quiet morning in March, 193 CE. The streets of Rome were calm. Merchants opened their stalls. Children played in the alleys. And inside the imperial palace, Pertinax believed he had a little more time. Time to push his reforms. Time to outlast the conspiracies. Time to heal the empire. But the Praetorian Guard had already made their decision. 300 armed soldiers marched toward the palace. They were not there to protect the emperor. They were there to end him. Word spread quickly. Senators fled into hiding. Servants bolted the doors. Yet the guard broke through every gate. They stormed into the marble halls, their boots pounding like thunder. When they reached Pertinax, he did something no one expected. He did not run. He did not call for his own guards. He stood tall, the same way he had stood as a schoolteacher before unruly boys, the same way he had faced barbarian warriors on the battle. And he spoke. "Why are you here?" he asked them. His voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. "I have given you nothing but respect. I have tried to restore Rome. If you are angry, take my life, but do not destroy the empire with me." Some of the soldiers hesitated. Here was no tyrant, no commodus, no madman. Here was a man who had lived simply, ruled justly, and cared for Rome more than for himself. For a moment, silence filled the palace. Perhaps, if fortune had turned just a little, he might have swayed them. But greed is louder than honor. One soldier lunged forward. The others followed. Steel flashed. Blades pierced. And just like that, the dream of Pertinax, the slave who rose to emperor, ended on the marble floor of his own palace. He had ruled for 87 days. Home gesped. The Senate, terrified, did nothing. The people mourned, but they were powerless. And the Praetorian Guard? They committed an act that would stain their name forever. They auctioned the Roman Empire. Standing in their camp, the soldiers declared that the throne would go not to a hero, not to a philosopher, not to a man of vision, but to whoever could pay them the most gold. The richest senator, Didius Julianus, offered an enormous sum. And so, with a handshake and a bribe, the empire was sold like cattle in the marketplace. Rome had fallen to its lowest shame. But history would not forget Pertinax. To his enemies, he was naive, a man who thought honesty could tame corruption, who believed justice could outmatch greed. But to others, he was a symbol, a man born in chains, who rose not by bloodline, not by wealth, but by sheer determination. A man who showed that Rome could be ruled with fairness, even if only for 3 short months. In the centuries that followed, emperors like Septimius Severus would honor his name. Coins were struck with his face. Statues raised in his memory. The Senate would later declare him divus, a god among the emperors. And yet, the question lingers. Was Pertinax a hero who dared to fight Rome's corruption, or a fool who believed he could tame wolves with kindness? Perhaps both. Perhaps that is why his story still burns with tragedy. Because in the end, the man who wore the purple not for glory, not for greed, but for justice was cut down not by enemies at the frontier, but by the very men sworn to guard him. The slave who became emperor showed Rome a glimpse of what it could be. But Rome, blinded by its own greed, refused to see it. And so the empire marched on, toward more chaos, more blood, and eventually its own downfall. But Pertinax's story survives, carried across centuries. A reminder that sometimes the noblest rulers are not born to power, but rise from the ashes of chains. And a question that still echoes, what if Rome had listened? And a question that still echoes, what if Rome had listened?